Welcome to Prospects to Pros. We talk about the guys who are about to get drafted in the NFL, the guys who just got drafted in the NFL, and everything in between. Obviously, we are tilting a lot more toward the guys that are about to get drafted because it's about to get real for you, Dane Brugler. We got Shrine Game practices starting on Saturday. Senior Bowl is next week. The coaches, as their seasons end, are going to start getting into the draft prospect preview mix and start deciding what they want as opposed to what the scouts want. It's about to get very interesting.
This is one of my favorite times of the year because we've got NFL playoffs, we've got the All-Star games going on, where practices for the Shrine Game are this weekend, but then you're also looking forward to Mobile and trying to get a better understanding of everything that's going to happen there. So yeah, it's a fun time and things are starting to come together. I came out with my top 15 in each position this week, which will undoubtedly fluctuate a little bit throughout the process. But it's a good starting point as we go through the next few months.
Well, and the top 15 is a great place to start. The positional top 15, quarterback. We've talked about the ones at the top. I am curious, as these all-star games are upon us. The last few years we've seen quarterbacks play in the all-star games who were projected to go fairly high, and we've actually seen some rise higher in the process. Carson Wentz went and played in the Senior Bowl and wound up being number 2 overall. Josh Allen played in the Senior Bowl. Daniel Jones was in the Senior Bowl. Are we going to see anybody do that this year where they might be able to launch themselves into the first round?
Probably not. I mean, it's an interesting quarterback group at this year's Senior Bowl because you think back to last year where I think everybody was wowed
Kenny
by
Pickett
Malik Willis.
was in there.
Yeah, well, but I think Malik Willis, that there was more oxygen with him than any other quarterback because of the way the ball came off his hand and the way he moved. And so everybody was talking about Malik Willis. And even Desmond Ridder got some run with because I thought he got better throughout the week. But it was Kenny Pickett who was the most consistent from start to finish. And, he was the only quarterback in last year's draft overall who went in the first 2 rounds. This year, we might not have any of these Senior Bowl quarterbacks go in the top 100. That's taking into account that Will Levis, barring some last-minute change of heart, is not going to be at this year's Senior Bowl. Hendon Hooker will be. He has accepted his invite. He's going to be down there and take part in interviews and things like that, which is a smart thing to do if you have that opportunity. I remember Aaron Murray did that a couple of years ago when he was hurt, couldn't participate, but take advantage of it. Get FaceTime with scouts and teams and coaches. So not including Levis or Hooker, who's the next best senior quarterback? There's a lot of differing opinions on who that guy could be. In my rankings, I have Jake Haener, but I'm not sure that this is necessarily a setting that's going to, he's going to wow because he's very average physically. He's not going to look great. The ball's going to look okay coming off his arm, but not exceptional.
He's also been playing on a broken ankle for 3 months.
Yeah, no kidding. But he's the type of guy that, really impresses in, game setting where you see those competitive juices. You see him stand up in the face of pressure and make throws. And so I don't know that a guy like Jake Haener is really going to benefit from this week. I think, if there's one quarterback who could really ascend, it's probably Max Duggan from TCU because, he's got the arm strength. He's got the mobility. I'm very eager to see him next to these other quarterbacks to see, what's the ball placement look like? What's the accuracy? The mechanics are very inconsistent. But I want to see him how he does compared to these other more polished quarterbacks like a Clayton Tune from Houston, Stetson Bennett from Georgia. These guys are all backups, projected backups. Maybe they could be more. You think about Jake Haener. I mean, maybe at worst, that guy could be a Taylor Heineke at the NFL level. Maybe he could be even more than that. And I wrote in my top 15, and I know you agree with this, that if there's a Brock Purdy in this draft, maybe it is Haener. A guy
got a column coming out Thursday on The Athletic where I examined Stetson Bennett, Max Duggan, Jake Haener in the context of Brock Purdy and what we didn't think about this time last year. Now, you mentioned Clayton Tune. That's another one. One stat
Mhm.
when I was working on this now Clayton Tune is a much more prototypical sized guy,
Yeah.
is 6'3", 220. But here's a stat that I found very interesting because Houston went from 12-2 to 8-5. Clayton Tune's numbers didn't appreciably change other than he had to throw a lot more. His attempts went up, but his completion percentage, yards per attempt, similar. His touchdown passes went up because his attempts went up. The stat that mattered for Houston had nothing to do with Clayton Tune. They went from allowing 20.4 points a game to allowing 32.2 points a
Mhm.
game.
Yeah.
Well, you look at that and you're like, oh, Clayton Tune, he must not be very good because they only won 8 games and they didn't play that tough of a schedule. Well, maybe because the other side of the ball stunk.
Yeah. Oh, that's a big part of it, no question. And I mean, take into account that he's a three-time team captain. He's number 2 in school history in touchdowns, both passing and touchdowns responsible for, behind only Case Keenum. He set an ACC AAC record this year with 40 touchdown passes. There are only 3 quarterbacks at the FBS level that had 40 or more touchdowns. And the other 2 guys, Caleb Williams, CJ Stroud, two pretty good players. So
Pretty
I
good.
mean,
Yeah.
yeah, Clayton Tune is. I think when you look at, he's a natural passer. He's got functional mobility. He did some of his best work late in games. I think he has that clutch gene to him. And so you factor in the intangibles, and yeah, Clayton Tune has all the ingredients to be a backup in this league for a long time. And if he's in the right opportunity, you never know. Maybe he could be more than that.
Yeah. And that's now Duggan is an air raid guy.
Hmm.
Dana Holgerson, who's Clayton Tune's coach, jokes that he got kicked out of the air raid because they do too many things with the tight ends and they'll play multiple running backs and
RPO and
yeah.
yeah.
So Tune might be a little less of a learning curve for Tune. Duggan will have a higher learning curve than some of these other guys, and that's also something to factor in. Before we
Mhm.
started recording, I was talking to Dane about talking to Brock Purdy this time last year, and I had forgotten this detail in our interview last year. Brock mentioned that Tom Manning, his college offensive coordinator at Iowa State, he was, really tight with Nick Sirianni, coached tight ends for Nick Sirianni at Indianapolis in 2018, and then came back to Iowa State with essentially Nick Sirianni's offense. So, Purdy had been running an NFL type offense that requires a lot of pre-snap motion, not the
Mhm.
same one he's running now, but much more similar than most college quarterbacks have to deal with.
Yeah, no, that's a great point, and that's when you evaluate the quarterback position. There are just so many of these little details, little variables that are part of the equation. And it's hard to really put it all together because there's so many of them, and you have to really go hunting. And it's like finding puzzle pieces. And the
Yeah.
more puzzle pieces you find, the more of you put them together, the better, the more clear picture you're going to get. And so I mean, even let's include Jaron Hall in that conversation, the BYU
Mhm.
quarterback, who
Yep.
very
Whose
undersized, but
receivers were hurt all year.
yeah, so
Yet
is
his
he.
numbers kept going up.
Yeah, but he's a guy that is, the leadership's outstanding. He's a very good athlete. He played baseball
Yep.
at BYU. He was also a big time basketball player in high school. Older guy. He's going to be a 25-year-old guy when he's drafted or on draft weekend. He's married already. So he's got a daughter. He's already moved on to that part of his life. But that's when you talk about a quarterback. That's not something that it could be a positive, when you factor in the maturity level and that type of thing. So he's part of that. And then also Tyson Bagent, the,
Mhm.
Shepherd quarterback, small school guy who, we've talked about him on the pod before, who is just a really talented player, really productive at that level. How is that jump going to work out for him this week? Where he's
Yeah.
playing, it's much faster. Everything's happening at a faster pace. It'll be really interesting to see how he does throughout the week. You just want to see progress. You want to see him get better
Yeah.
from Tuesday to Wednesday to Thursday at those practices.
Now, last year it was Christian Watson in the Senior Bowl practices, and if you watched North
Yeah.
Dakota State, you knew what kind of talent he was. But most people don't watch North Dakota State, except maybe in the
Mhm.
FCS national championship game. Who might it be this year? Whether it maybe an FCS guy or even a guy who played FBS Power Five, who maybe didn't get as much shine or played for a team that wasn't all that good. who might that person be this year where we come out of the week going, oh, wow, this guy could be something?
Yeah, there are a couple names, and you know what? Let's just stick with wide receiver. Talking about Christian Watson, there are a couple wide receivers in this group that I think this is a big week for them. Iosivas, the Princeton wide receiver, in terms of a track athlete translating to football, that's what this guy is. I mean, he is a record-setting track athlete, heptathlon. He's a guy that really came on this year in terms of his production as a guy that can stretch the field. He could be a catch and run guy, but obviously playing in the Ivy League, and then that's a big jump going up against guys at the next level. So I'm really interested to see what he does. Dontavian Wicks from Virginia, another
Mm-hmm.
really talented player, good size, good speed, makes some really athletic catches, but he also had too many drops. His production dropped off this year. But how much of that was a result of that Virginia offense just being a
Right.
train wreck, And so
Yeah.
big week for Dontavian Wicks to kind of right the ship and get back on track. So those are two guys that I think could really, really help themselves with a big week.
And I believe Jonathan Mingo from Ole Miss is there too. That's another
Yep.
one that I'm curious
Hmm.
about because I think if you look at what I cover in college football, the fact that Lane Kiffin just took two quarterbacks out of the transfer portal suggests to me he was not particularly pleased with the play of Jackson Dart last year. So it could be
Hmm.
that Jonathan Mingo just didn't have somebody throwing him the ball that could really give him an opportunity to shine. And this is a guy who's 6'2", 220. We've seen some fairly big Ole Miss receivers wind up being pretty good.
Yeah,
DK Metcalf, AJ Brown. So
he might have two of the biggest sets of hands in the draft. I mean, he's got these humongous mitts that help him catch a football. I think he tracks the ball really well. As a route runner, still a little raw, but he's not sudden in his route breaks, but I thought he was really coordinated. He doesn't lose a lot of momentum out of his breaks, and so with that size, good catch and react receiver. So we're not talking about just a possession threat guy. He's someone that can create after the catch. I'm with you. I think Mingo, when we talk about the top seniors in this wide receiver class, I think for me, it starts with Rashee Rice. Then you've got a couple guys that are actually going to be at the Shrine game, and A.T. Perry and Zay Flowers.
yeah.
But then you get some interesting guys like Mingo and Trey Palmer from Nebraska, who will be in Mobile, and Xavier Hutchinson from Iowa State. So there's going to be some interesting wide receiver talents at Senior Bowl.
Well, that Shrine game receiver core, you mentioned Zay Flowers, who I think was
Sure.
fantastic at Boston College. Uh, Phil Jurkovec injured a lot, never has not quite lived up to his potential yet. We'll see. He's transferred to Pitt. We'll see if he can do that. But A.T. Perry just produced like crazy at Wake
Yeah.
Forest. And the other guy at the Shrine game is Jake Bobo from UCLA, who was
Yep.
breakout star for UCLA after transferring from Duke.
Yep, exactly. And not gonna be the fastest guy out there, but he's big and he does a really nice job isolating the football. Can win as kind of a post up receiver. So yeah, I don't. He was an afterthought coming into the year. Wasn't considered a draftable guy. Barely considered a PFA. But with what he did this year in that UCLA offense, I mean, he's put himself in position to potentially be drafted. And if he has a good week over there in Vegas during Shrine practices, yeah, absolutely. He can put himself in that draftable territory.
So we're still on offense, and the offensive linemen always my favorite people to watch at the Senior
Yep.
Bowl. I love one-on-one pass pro drills, but I'm curious who has a chance to kind of move up the draft board. One name that popped out to me was Darnell Wright, who is the right tackle at Tennessee. He was a 5-star recruit, didn't really develop until kind of his junior senior year. Had a very good year this year, it felt like, but the question is, where does he stack up in terms of NFL talent? Obviously, he's been playing
Yep.
against very good D line talent in the SEC, but is he ready to make a jump and potentially be an NFL starter next year?
Yeah, and he's a player that coming into the year was very just overlooked because former high recruit, but just hadn't lived up to it. Struggled last year in 2021 as a left tackle. he moves back to right tackle this year. And I mean, it's like every single tape, he's pitching shutout after shutout. Just, go watch him against Alabama and Will Anderson. Just every tape you put on him. And I was really impressed with him. And really, both him and Brian Brzee watched the bowl game, which meaningless bowl game, quote unquote meaningless, but both those
Right.
guys brought it in that game. And that was a fun match. I think it really showcases the strengths of both Brzee and of Darnell Wright. I mean, Darnell Wright is a guy that he's well built. He's 6'5", going to be around 340 pounds. The violence that he plays with, his recovery skills, and especially with his upper body, he does a really nice job. So he's got that power twitch to him. He's the type of guy that I'm bothered a little bit by the wide hands and some of the mistakes, but that's coachable stuff. Focusing on what's not really coachable and what he does well, I think that's what's going to make him an NFL starter. And that's really, this is an interesting theme with a lot of right tackles that are going to be at the Senior Bowl. Talking about DeJuan Jones from Ohio State.
Huge.
Humongous, but obviously there's limitations with his movements and what does that look like in one-on-ones? It's a lot easier to hide, just when you're in the course of a game, but during one-on-ones, there's nowhere to hide against some of these pass rushers. So DeJuan Jones, how does he hold up in those matchups? Wanya Morris from Oklahoma, who was Darnell Wright's teammate at Tennessee, he transfers to Oklahoma and had a really nice year. There's talent there. And so trying to figure out Wanya Morris. Not a right tackle, more of a left tackle, but Jalen Duncan, who from Maryland, who I have not been impressed with, but maybe he can sway some opinions. So the tackles this year at the Senior Bowl, there's money to be made. And it's something that I think teams will be focusing on quite a bit this week.
Well, let's talk about the guys who will be trying to take that money from them and give it to themselves at Senior Bowl practice, the edge rushers, because we can all agree on Will Anderson. You've talked about Tyree Wilson a ton from Texas Tech, and if you've watched Tyree Wilson play, exactly.
Coming off that injury, I doubt he'll be playing in Mobile. Hopefully, I'm wrong, but we'll see.
Yeah, and then obviously Miles Murphy from Clemson's another one who everybody agrees is very good. But who has a chance this next week to really shine and possibly make some money?
There's a lot of guys. I think when I was doing my top 15 position by position, I felt really good about my top 6 guys. And that was Will Anderson, Tyree Wilson, Miles Murphy, Van Ness, Nolan Smith, and B.J. Ojulari. I felt really good about that. Then that's where it's between 7 and 15, or even 7 and 20. It's just a crowded group of different types of pass rushers, and so it's like one scheme's going to prefer one guy, another scheme might prefer another guy. So it depends on what, it's hard to have some of these guys in the same conversation when they're just so different. And that's where it's tough to do rankings from just a general perspective. But, I think that's where an event like the Senior Bowl can help a guy move up or down and really maybe leapfrog someone else. A guy like Will McDonald, from Iowa State.
Right.
This guy is a big time. He looks like a basketball athlete, and that's a good thing and a bad thing. Wish he had a little more bulk on his frame. You wish he was a more polished pass rusher for being a 5th-year senior. But he's bendy. He's an athlete. He's got quickness. He's so long. There's a lot of things to like about Will McDonald, and I think how he performs in one-on-ones in terms of his rush setup, can he finish, and then also the interviews. Teams need to be convinced that Will McDonald is all in on football, and the makeup is there for him to be potentially a top 50 pick in this draft. So it'll be a big week for Will McDonald. Isaiah Foskey from Notre Dame, who back-to-back years with double-digit sacks. He had 7 forced fumbles the last 2 years, and over the course of his career at Notre Dame, he had 4 blocked punts. I mean, there's a lot of things production-wise that make you go, okay, this guy's a player. The tape, I don't think it is as good as maybe the numbers. He just doesn't have much in his pass rush repertoire in terms of really getting blockers off balance. But he plays hard. He plays with speed. And that's something that if you play with those two things, production's going to come. And so interested to see how he holds up this week. But, I mean, we could go on and on. Zach Harrison from Ohio State, as freaky as he is, how does he perform? Derek Hall
from Auburn is the one I'm curious about, because he played against great competition. He always seemed to flash in big games. And then the way this season went for them, he was one of the guys who helped keep everything together on that roster, which I think matters. And I am curious because now I just want to see the physical piece of it. He's 250. He's got a really quick first step, but how does he do against elite offensive tackles?
Yeah, Derek Hall is such a great story. He was born like 4 months premature. He was under
Yeah,
3 pounds when he was born. Like he was basically they said he was dead. I mean, and they doctors suggested terminating the baby, and his mom was like, "No, we're this kid's set out for something special." And I mean, he defied everything, and that leadership piece is a big part of it with keeping that team together and just riling the teammates. He's a vocal guy. I know he's a
yeah,
semifinalist for the Jason Witten Man of the Year award. No surprise he was a team captain and all that. But on the field, look, I mean, he's a long, rocked up pass rusher, and you see a variety of stab moves, speed to power, sets a physical edge in the run game. Now he is a little stiff. He's not that super bendy type of pass rusher who's just going to be able to capture the corner. And the biggest thing I need to see from him is the counter maneuvers. It's one
yeah.
thing if you're that initial plan, but when that first move doesn't work, what's your plan B, and can you go to it on a consistent basis to win and disrupt the pocket? So, but yeah, Derek Hall is a good player and definitely belongs somewhere on day two.
So the position other than offensive tackle, edge rusher, that I feel like at the Senior Bowl you can really be exposed or you can really solidify yourself is corner.
Yeah.
And I'm curious who you think, because I remember like talking to Roger McCreary last year, and he was a
Mm,
guy I didn't feel like needed to prove anything at the Senior Bowl. Like he'd played against really good he played at Auburn. He'd played against really good receivers his entire career. He'd been
yeah.
very effective against them. But he was from Mobile and just wanted to play in the Senior Bowl, had always wanted to. And you saw him starting for the Titans this year. But who among these guys one needs to show that they can do this against this level of competition, and who could possibly really make themselves some money?
Well, as of the time of this taping, I believe Devin Witherspoon, the Illinois corner, is still on the roster and plans to play, which hopefully he does because he has a chance to be the best player, period,
Yeah.
at this year's Senior Bowl. He's that good. Not the most impressive looking. I mean, he's only going to tip the scale at maybe 100, maybe 185 pounds. We'll see. But he plays with so much dog in him. He's so competitive. I mean, what he did this year, what he put on film as a senior, he's a first round pick all day. I mean, I think in my mock draft, I had him going 18th, something like that, around there, 17th. And he could potentially go higher. I think it depends on what type of corner you're looking for between guys like Christian Gonzalez and Joey Porter Jr. and Devin Witherspoon, guys like that. So this is a really good corner group, and Witherspoon's one of the better ones, clearly the best senior. But some of these other seniors have a chance too. I'm a big fan of Caillou Blue Kelly, the Stanford
Hmm.
corner. He's got the pedigree. His dad played in the league as a corner for a long time. I think he put a lot of good film on tape. A lot of Stanford players get overlooked because they've been so bad the last few years. I'd even
Right.
throw Elijah Higgins in there, the wide receiver, who has a lot of talent. And I'm eager to see what he can do during Senior Bowl practices. Maybe a lesser known name at the position who could really show up is Darrell Luter, South Alabama.
Hmm.
And when you hear South Alabama going to Mobile, your first thought is, oh, that's some home cooking because
Right.
all the practices are done
They
at the South
they host the
Alabama campus.
exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, they want to bring good press and be good to the home school. Now, this guy belongs. I mean, this is a
Yeah.
really good player who is a JUCO guy. No one really wanted him, and he's just kept fighting and developing. And he's I think just a physical man-to-man corner who has a chance to be a mid-round pick and prove that he could be a starter in the league.
Yeah. It's so getting back to the quarterbacks in the All-Star games. Like, is it a mistake for Will Levis not to go play in the Senior Bowl?
Yeah, it's always interesting conversation when you do this with quarterbacks, because I'm of the belief that you don't hurt yourself at an All-Star game. But let's be honest, if Will Levis, who's already being talked about as a top 5 pick, potentially number 1
Mhm.
overall, if he goes out there and throws a few picks and Twitter's all over it, like it's just it can get away from you. And the public perception shouldn't matter that much because they're not the guy, they're not the people making the draft picks. But all of this factors in, and it's with the guy like Will Levis, who is coming off the injury. Didn't he since he got hurt, was his foot
Yeah.
around mid-season. He just
Just
didn't look the same.
before the South Carolina game, yeah, and then he came back
Yeah,
against Tennessee, and that was maybe his worst game
only
of the season.
Yeah,
Yeah,
only missed 1 game, and he just clearly didn't look the same second half of the year. But I mean, I think it's just testament to his toughness, just playing through that injury. Getting right for the combine is a big part of this, and just for the pre-draft process, getting healthy, things like that. But the way I view this game and evaluate it, I do view it through the lens of you can only help yourself. Now, whether or
yeah.
not everyone believes that, I don't, it's everyone's got a different perspective. So I would love to see Will Levis at this game, but you know what? I also am not gonna necessarily blame him if he decides not to go.
Yeah. Well, actually, Bryce Young could play in it too because he
Yeah,
has
that's
his
true.
degree. He's on that
Yeah,
list of when the NFL sent out the list of people who got special
Will
exemptions. He
Anderson,
actually
come on down. He
exact.
can
Can
come
you
too. Yeah.
imagine? That'd be great.
Oh god.
Now,
Yeah.
if I were in those two's position, I don't think I would do anything because you
Right.
already know where you're at. You've got enough
Fair.
tape. You don't have. But Levis, there's still questions about which I feel like you
Mhm.
might be able to answer if you're that confident in yourself. And that's what, like, I feel like Kenny Pickett solidified his spot as a first rounder last year at that game.
Yeah, I mean, I think at least he did for me. I know that he was the most consistent quarterback during the week. I mean, he went there, took care of business, did well with the coaches. Yeah, Levis is just he's a tough, because there's so much about him that's projection, and
Hmm.
I think he's a guy that could really help himself, because I think he'll look great in shorts and pads and non-contact drills. He doesn't have to think too much. It's just kind of point and shoot. So because I think the biggest things when you watch him on film where he needs to get better, the read efficiency in terms of just understanding all the moving parts around him and being on time with the right decision, and just doing that consistently with the right ball placement. I mean, that is something that we saw glimpses of as a junior, and then with all the changing parts this past year, we didn't see enough of it on a senior tape. But I think there's enough about his skill set that is really promising. So I agree with you. I would like to see him in Mobile. I think he could really help himself, but at the same time, I also don't. I'm not going to kill him for not going. I understand why he wouldn't.
Yeah, it does feel like he's pretty firmly ensconced in the
Right.
first round right now, which I don't know that I'd mess with at this point. But let's talk about what happens now. But because as we record this, the conference championships games are this weekend, and then there's a super. So there's only 4 teams still playing. You know, coaching hires are being made, coordinator hires are being made. At what point do the coaches who just finished up their season begin in earnest to start prepping for the draft, getting with the personnel department and trying to reconcile, what the front office wants with what the on-field staff wants?
That really, the Senior Bowl is kind of that first step, for a lot of these coaches, where they're really getting involved, watching the tape, getting a little prep work in before they see him in Mobile, and then during practices, that's where a lot of these coaches will get their introduction. And so, first impressions, they matter quite a bit, and for a lot of players, this is that opportunity, and that's why, we don't. I think we need to kind of put the groundwork here that the draft process, as I don't think there's as much fluctuation as people
Mhm.
think. Most of the hay is in the barn at this point.
Yeah.
All the tape is in. I know, like me personally, I haven't watched 100% of the tape that I need to watch. I'm probably 85, 90% there. So, I'm still finishing up tape from games from the season, but I'm one person. I'm not a scouting department where teams, they've done all the scouts, all the area scouts, they've turned in their grades. The teams
Yeah.
have preliminary grades on every single player from the season. And so now it becomes the cross-checking part of the draft process. That's where the All-Star games come in, the combine. That these are events served to cross-check what you saw during the season, either verifying what you saw or saying, hey, this is a little different. We need to go back and figure out, okay, was this on tape? Is this something we missed? Is this something that maybe he just really prepared for during the pre-draft process? You have to figure that part out. And so for coaches, that's, they come into this at an interesting time where they have a little bit different perspective than the area scouts and the front offices that have been and really looking at these guys the last few years.
Mhm.
And so it is an interesting perspective that the coaches bring.
Well, and how does that work? I would assume it depends on the staff. I mean, obviously,
Right.
in New England, Bill Belichick does what he wants to do. But for instance, now I say this during a week where every time I go in the gym, the TVs are always on, the volume is turned down, but it's should Mike McCarthy be fired? But like, for example, let's say Mike McCarthy is still the coach of the Dallas Cowboys, which it sounds like he will be. Uh,
Yeah.
like how much say do he and Kellen Moore and I'm assuming Dan Quinn's going to be gone and head coaching somewhere else, but the defensive coordinator get with the Jones guys? Can they
Yeah.
say I want this and get it, or
Oh
do
yeah.
Jerry and Steven say this is what we want and that's what you're going to deal with?
Oh no, I mean, listen, each team, each front office has a different structure, and each one is unique to that ownership and the way that they want to, process things. Like, okay, the Cowboys, for example, the coaches very much have a say in who's going to be the draft pick. If okay, go back a couple years, what is that, 2017, 2018? The draft, this if it was up to the scouts, the Cowboys would have drafted TJ Watt in that
Mm.
draft. Instead, the coaches, they didn't think he fit. They saw him as more of a 3-4 guy, stand-up guy, and instead they took Taco Charlton. And so, it's one of those cases where you've got one side saying one thing, another side saying the other, and it's up to Will McClay and the Jones family to figure out, okay, well, how's that going to stack on our board, and what our pick is going to be, and so but each team is different with how they structure things. In terms of the Senior Bowl, most teams will, their area scouts will be there in Mobile, and each area scout will have kind of a position where they have to cross check.
Yeah.
So, if you're a Southeast scout, maybe you have linebackers. So you're during the week. You're not necessarily watching your guys that you scouted from the SEC all year. You're not watching,
You're putting
your
another set
Georgia
of eyes
players.
on right. You're putting another set
Right.
of eyes on
Yeah.
somebody that somebody else scouted.
Right. You're watching all the linebackers and you're putting in, your grades, and you're doing these interviews and things like that. And so that's where I go back to. It's a big cross-checking exercise, and coaches get involved with that. And that's why it's really valuable for these teams to coach at the Senior Bowl to learn more about these guys and just figure out how they operate. I know, going back to last year, talking to one of the coaches, he didn't have the most positive things to say about Carson Strong and the way he kind of handled himself during the meetings before the Senior Bowl. And it's just people, these players need to remember that the entire process is one big job interview.
Yeah.
Don't come into the meeting room in sandals. Don't prop your feet up and don't take any notes. I mean, even if you're faking it,
Yeah.
take a couple different colored pens and take your diligent notes, take your highlighter, and act engaged, even if it's an act, whatever. But it's the biggest thing that these agents need to prepare their clients for. It's one big job interview. Act like it from start to finish. Don't for a moment think someone's not watching you, because I guarantee you somebody is. And so it's something that it's a really interesting part of this whole thing that we don't necessarily talk about enough as a big part of this process.
I think there's a branding opportunity here that we need to take advantage of. We need we need to give the athletic care package to the prospects at the All-Star games and at the combine. What we do is
Right.
we have an athletic notebook that has the logo on it and everything,
Mm-hmm.
and prominent logo. So when it's open, you see the athletic logo. The coaches, the players see it. We're looking for brand awareness here,
Yeah.
and each person gets 3 gel pens because everybody loves the clicky top gel pen. That's the
Mhm.
quality stuff, and then three different color highlighters. And I guarantee those coaches and front office people are like, wow, this person's really prepared. They have
Right.
a purple, a yellow, and an orange highlighter. They are
Yeah.
really taking good notes.
Oh yeah. No, hey, I remember when I was in 6th grade, I really wanted to make the basketball team. And I was
Yep.
probably I mean, I felt good about making it, but there was always a chance, because I think they only took maybe 11 guys or something like that. And I was, somewhere in that 7 to 15 range, where it wasn't good enough to be a starter, but probably good enough to make the team, but not a lock.
Mhm.
And so I remember the one Saturday morning, just taking a little jog around where the coach lived, and just not
Ah,
being obvious about it, but
look
just
at
taking a little
that.
jog. So there was a chance that he would probably see me, and
Yeah.
hey, what are you doing? Oh, got to get these miles in, coach. Just
Working, coach. Working.
yeah, and as soon as he did, and we had that little 30-second conversation, boop, right back home, and I just wanted to get it in there. So hey, I deserve to be on this team, and so even if you have to fake it a little bit, do what you got to do.
See, my high school basketball story is very different. I went to high school at a very large school in Florida. You
Mhm.
had to be very good at basketball to make the basketball team. I was not, but they did kind of put out an open call my sophomore junior year because in our district was Daytona Beach Mainland High School, and at the
Mm.
time there was a 6'6" guy at Mainland named Vince Carter. And
I've heard of
basically
it.
they were like, can we get 5 football players to just foul Vince Carter 25 times and just foul out in 2-3 minutes and be done?
Jeez. He was 6'6" in high school. Wow,
He
that's
was unstoppable. I
oh,
his junior year, I went to a game against another team at the school where my dad worked, and I watched him jump over the point guard who was standing straight up in the air. The point guard was like 5'7", and Vince just jumped straight over him. His foot cleared the guy's head, and yeah, it was incredible. And actually, one of the best football players I played against in high school was this guy named T.T. Tolliver, who was the quarterback at Mainland. Wound up being he was on the practice squad when the Bucks won the Super Bowl in 2002. But his job as the point guard on the Mainland basketball team was throw half court lobs to Vince. And they would do like 8 of them a game. It was
hey.
incredible.
I mean, that's having a guy like that is just a cheat code at that level. I mean, it's what are
Yeah.
you gonna do? That's yeah, that's bizarre. Whew.
Yeah, my one of my best friends had to guard Vince on Vince's 18th birthday, and Vince dropped 40 on him.
Oh, I mean, that sounds like maybe better than what it could have been. I mean,
Oh, and it could
jeez,
have like Vince could have scored 60 a game if he'd wanted to. It didn't even matter. It did not
I
matter.
believe
But
it.
yeah, so that's but yeah, I mean, those guys, listen, if you're not that level of talent, and there are, Will Anderson, CJ
Mm,
Stroud, those guys that can pretty much do whatever they want to. Some of the stories I've heard about Johnny Manziel in the pre-draft process, like,
mm,
still mystifies me that he got drafted in the first round, even despite the production in college.
yeah,
But yeah, what Dane said is true. I mean, like, if you just come in and are diligent, take notes, polite, and appear to be engaged,
yeah,
what a difference it makes. And it's crazy to me because I know all the agents tell their players this,
right.
but the ones who don't listen, like, how do you not listen to that?
Mm-hmm.
It's the
Yeah.
freaking NFL.
I mean, I go back to when I was 22 years old, and I would have liked to think that I would have too. But you know what? It's at that age, and you're used to being the best, and it's a different mindset for some of these guys. And I'm not saying that's how a lot of these guys will attack it. But there are Clayton Tune is about to turn 24 years old.
Yeah.
Jake Hayner is an older guy. I think, just getting a chance to talk to Tyson Bagent, and, he's been a small school guy his entire life. And so, I think he'll have the mindset of, okay, I got to do whatever I can to really
Yeah.
stand out. So I don't think, Hendon Hooker, I think, he's another older guy that knows how this process works and what he needs to do. So yeah, I'm not too worried about this quarterback class, but it's just a reminder that everything is an interview as part of this
Yeah.
process. Every little detail.
Well, and that goes back to, and if you want, listen to my podcast, The Andy Staples Show, on the Andy Staples Show and Friends feed on Friday. We're going to have some chunks from that conversation with Brock Purdy before the draft last year, where we kind of look on them in a new light. And you're going to
Mm-hmm.
listen to some of those and go, well, this makes a lot of sense. And one of the things that Brock said during that interview was, every single bit of this is an interview. Everything I do is what Brock was doing when I went to visit him in St. Augustine, he was working with a guy who works mostly with Major League Baseball pitchers on arm health, long-term arm health. He was trying to learn how to make sure he doesn't wear out his arm and that his arm will work for him for the next 15, 20 years, which is what the Major League Baseball pitchers have to do because the throwing motion is so violent that theirs is going to break down at some point. But quarterbacks can keep their arm healthy for that long. And I thought it was really interesting that was where his mind had gone. Like, I got to make sure my
Yeah.
arm's healthy for 15 years. This is a guy who didn't even know if he's going to make a team.
Yeah. Last pick in the draft. Nothing's guaranteed, but yeah, he's got the right mindset. And that's obviously, it's my son's doing indoor soccer right now. And, I tell him every time, look, you're going to get out what you put in. And, if you're not busting it on every play, if you're kind of holding back and not being as aggressive as you can, it's, you're not going to give as many chances to score. And, it's the same thing at every level of any sport. You get out what you're going to put into it. And so the more you put in, the better chances you have to achieving some type of success. And for some guys, it takes a little bit of luck. If Brock Purdy does not end up with Kyle Shanahan in San Francisco with that talent around him, who knows? He might not have made a final.
He might have started a playoff game for the Dolphins if he
possible.
Could have been in Skylar Thompson's place. But it is amazing.
It does take a little bit of luck. I mean, that is definitely part of this. But it sometimes, you know what? That's you get a little bit of luck, and the rest is just your hard work. And with Purdy, that guy, and just listening to him after the games, he's almost like a robot. Like he doesn't really, okay, now, he doesn't want to celebrate about it. He's just, okay, we did what we needed to do. It's time to move on. And, the goal is not this. And so, not everybody's wired that way, but that's also why Jake Hayner is my number one senior quarterback at the Senior Bowl this year, is because I think he's wired a little bit like that. He's a guy that, is coming from the Mountain West, but you know what? He faced 5 Pac-12 opponents this year. In those 5 games, he averaged 68% completions, over 300 passing yards, and had 8 total touchdowns. So, and including that legendary comeback against UCLA in 2021, that was just, it kind of something that will follow him his entire career. How impressive that was. So, it's when you evaluate quarterbacks, it's kind of like a moving target in terms of what you latch onto. That this is going to translate, or this, and I'm guilty of it. I think everybody that evaluates a quarterback position is guilty of it. But it changes based off of who's doing well in the NFL. I mean, look at the 2 quarterbacks in the NFC Championship game with Brock Purdy and Jalen Hurts. 2 guys that were not first-round picks, were not expected to be here, but the competitive toughness that they bring, the work ethic, everything they do behind the scenes, the confidence that they exude on the field to their teammates in their play, that's okay. All of a sudden, maybe we're overlooking that in terms of being a paramount, attribute for the quarterback position during the evaluation process. So maybe I'm overcorrecting with putting or having Hayner as my top guy right now. Who knows? It's just, but that's the nature of the quarterback evaluation process.
But that's the thing. Do you make people want to be better around you? Do you make people want to play for you as well as with you? all that matters, especially at
Sure.
quarterback. And the two guys you just mentioned, Brock Purdy and Jalen Hurts, like just having covered them in college, they absolutely inspired their teammates to be better. They just like
Yeah.
the example they set, the way they interacted, and that I'll go back to talking to Brock this time last year. He said one of the things I want to tell NFL teams about myself is that I can be the glue in a locker room. And he's not saying that to brag. It's the truth.
Mm.
And he made that program at Iowa State appreciably better. Now Jalen Hurts was in a different situation in Alabama and Oklahoma, where he's around a bunch of studs who were the top of their recruiting classes and all that. But he immediately earned their respect. Like they
Yeah.
all respected his work ethic and what he did. So all that stuff matters absolutely. And that's where the interview rooms. That's the thing. The Senior Bowl, you and I, we're going to have fun. We're going to watch 101 Pass Pro. We're going to watch the receivers against the corners. We're going to watch the quarterbacks throw. But the part we don't get to see, where they're talking in the
Yeah.
conference rooms, that's where they can really show what they
Yeah.
can do.
And that's not to bring it back to Levis again, but I think that's why we're talking about him, or NFL teams are talking about him as highly as they do, because
Mm-hmm.
you talk to his coaches at Kentucky and you talk to scouts, and they all say the same thing. Like, football is really important to this guy. He was
Yep.
voted a team captain both of his years at Kentucky. The Liam Cohen told me, I don't have that exact quote in front of me, but it was something like, everybody feeds off him. Like
Yeah.
he's his
Oh,
the way
he has an
he.
effect on his teammates for sure.
Oh yeah, and they follow him, and it's not. And you look at Brock Purdy, you look at Jalen Hurts. It's not forced. It's not. It's all natural, where they feel comfortable in their skin and they go out there and they lead, and it just comes natural. And I think Levis has some of that, because that's just his personality with the way he operates, and that's something that will certainly help. And that's not to say that Stroud doesn't have that or Bryce Young doesn't have
Right.
that, but it is something that will be a check mark, a plus sign in the column for Levis.
All right. We're
What
gonna
what are
meet
you
up.
looking more forward to most in Mobile? Like, because
Well,
I mean, you see practices from a different perspective than
yeah.
probably I do. So what are you most looking forward to Tuesday through Thursday down there in Mobile?
Well, one-on-one pass pro always for me. But then
Yeah,
I'm lucky because in my job, a lot of the college coaches come to see their former players participate. It's good for business. It's good for recruiting. As you see these guys who are about to become draft picks, so they want to be photographed out there. But they're in a much more casual setting, so I get to talk to some of these guys, and they're going to tell me more about these players and more about what their teams were like this past season than they said in their press conferences. And I think that
yeah,
it's a very useful thing for me, but also just seeing some of these guys up close, and a lot of times when they kind of leave the nest, and you can talk to them, and they're not, they don't have a sports information director hovering over them for every interview. You get a different flavor of their personality too. Now
yeah.
sometimes they are who they were. Like Dameon
Mhm.
Pierce, same guy. He was awesome. He was awesome when we interviewed him when he played at Florida. He was awesome when I talked to him at the Senior Bowl. And like I couldn't be happier for that guy and how things turned out for him, because he wound up a starting running back in the NFL, and he knew what his talent level was.
Mhm.
He was so, like, you could tell going to the Senior Bowl, talking to him before those practices, he was so excited that he was really going to get to show it. And
Yeah.
I
Well,
love that. I love when you talk to those guys where they're about to blow up, and they know it
mhm.
too. And it's just
Yep.
it's a lot of fun.
And I do after the Senior Bowl each year, I do my winners at each position. And last year at running back, it wasn't even a question. I mean, yeah, Dameon Pierce. It's hard for running backs to stand out at the
Yeah,
Senior Bowl practices, but yeah, Dameon Pierce absolutely did. He was the winner, and I was also surprised he fell to the fourth round. But obviously the Texans very happy with how that played out.
that's exactly right. So, yep, can't wait. We are going to have to have a little turtle soup. We'll maybe head over to Meat Boss, have a little barbecue. It's going to be a
Nice.
lot of fun. And you and me and Lance will convene in Mobile next week, and that is where this podcast will originate from.
Yep, can't wait. It'll be fun.
Let's ride. We'll talk to you next week.